So recently I got a chance to speak with Cliffe and Stuart Knechtle, who showed up to my university. It was a pretty long line, but it was well worth it because I got to ask my question at the end. I think Cliffe and Stuart did a pretty good job answering everyone's questions. I will say their stamina for being able to speak for so long is pretty impressive because there was a lot of people there. So today's video is going to be two-part. First, I'm going to respond to Stuart's answers to my questions because I have some critiques to make, and I think I should have probably clarified my question a bit more. And then after that, I'm going to talk about how the event was and Cliffe and Stuart in general as people. So firstly, here's the clip of me asking my question.
What happens to people that don't believe in Jesus and they die? Do they go to heaven or hell?
Are you an atheist?
Correct.
You are, okay. We got an atheist, guys.
I didn't realize they love atheists this much. I guess we gotta all become atheists.
Because anybody who is an atheist, agnostic, like the last guy, please come forward, either line. We're trying to get more and more before we take a break. All right, so ask me one more time.
What happens to someone if they don't believe or don't know about Jesus Christ and they die?
They don't know about Jesus Christ. All right, it's a complicated question. The Bible doesn't explicitly answer it. It does talk about general revelation out of Romans 1 and Romans 2 about the starry skies above and the moral conscience within that do connect people to evidence for God existing and then putting your faith in Him. But the promise of the Bible is everybody's going to get a fair shake at either coming to know Jesus directly, a missionary, for example, in a remote tribe in Africa, or a boy in Myanmar or somewhere else, Thailand, will receive more of that general revelation. But I would point you to Acts chapter 10. You have a woman, seller of purple, who is a tremendously gifted businesswoman. She is met while opening the Bible, and she needs evidence, understandably, intellect, evidence for within the Bible. How is this true? Is the resurrection? Did that actually occur? Then there's a blue-collar man who's the lead jailer of a jail, and what does he need? Bravado, of course. He needs a miracle to believe. He gets a miracle. Then there's the slave girl who's enslaved, and what does she need? She needs to be freed. Sure enough, she's freed, and she puts her faith in Christ. So people have different needs, and oftentimes Jesus will come and say, all right, I'm going to meet your need in order to get you over to understanding what the faith is. Still their decision, though. He's not going to force them into heaven. But I think he meets people where they are at. And that could be when they're 3 years old, and it could be when they're 99 years old.
So the first part of Stuart's answer is that Jesus comes and meets people where they're at. He convinces them with what's available to them, allows them to gain an understanding based on their own experience. But one critique I have of this is that I don't see where Jesus is when you have individuals who are genuinely struggling to believe. You have people who want to believe, who desperately are trying to look for answers and the truth, but they're not finding anything. So I don't see where Jesus is in this process. If he's supposed to meet you where you're at, he should be doing that for the people that are trying their best to understand and believe. It's interesting to me how Jesus comes and meets people where they're at when they've already immersed themselves into Christian culture. They're going to church, they're reading the Bible, they're doing all this stuff. And it seems like a very select few people get to have this kind of Jesus is meeting them where they're at. Now, I don't know how this lines up with passages like Luke 14, where the shepherd goes out to get the one sheep from the 99. If God is truly trying to make that big of an effort to bring in non-believers, then it should be pretty trivial for him to do that for people that are non-resistant non-believers. And then there's the question of, does non-resistant non-belief even exist? Someone who's trying to believe but cannot. Is that even a real thing? Because sometimes they'll tell you, oh, this person has some emotional blockage. They have some psychological phenomenon going on that's stopping them from believing. Okay, so firstly, I don't know when the apologists became the psychologists, because they can apparently tell people what they're feeling now. If you are someone who accuses someone else of not believing because they have some hidden intention or emotion or motive, then you are basically declaring for that person what they are feeling and just telling them that they're being dishonest, basically. And I don't think that's an honest way to engage with someone who's genuinely trying to believe.
One big example right now is in Africa. I have a friend down there, eyewitness testimony himself. He sees thousands of Muslims coming to know Christ because they are believing Jesus based off of meeting him in dreams. Very strange. I don't think that's some type of crazy drug in the wheat right now. I don't think it's some type of mass hallucination that they're all having while they're sleeping. No, I think there's a spiritual element to that.
And then the next part here, Stuart talks about how Muslims across Africa are converting because Jesus is coming in their dream. Now, I'm not sure if this was Stuart's attempt to try to prove that Jesus is real because he's showing up in dreams, but if that is the attempt, there's some problems with it. Well, firstly, you already have a good foundation in Muslim culture where they believe that dreams are very significant. They're very significant guidance from God. So if they do happen to see Jesus in their dream, they are going to automatically assume that this is a very important revelation. And I'm sure in a lot of these communities, they're hearing about Christianity, they know Christianity exists, but they're not able to speak about this to any other person because it's usually frowned upon to talk about anything outside of Islam. So what ends up happening is they hold these subconscious thoughts inside, and then when they're dreaming, they're probably going to have a dream about Jesus, and they're going to think this is a sign instead of just realizing that this is their psyche trying to deal with all the subconscious thoughts about Christianity and all the questions they have throughout the day. But I don't know. I feel like this argument is pretty vague if you're trying to prove anything about Jesus' existence, because there's plenty of other religions where people have dreams about their specific deity or other deities, and there's a lot of documented cases of people talking about the Virgin Mary showing up to them and talking to them. And I'm pretty sure Stuart and Cliffe don't believe in the Virgin Mary, and they don't think that she's actually appearing to people and talking to them. So I guess you can chalk this up to being general revelation, but there's too many psychological factors, there's too many social, cultural factors that can explain it away that it doesn't have much footing.
Is someone who is evangelizing not potentially putting the person at risk of eternal damnation? Like the agnostic that we had earlier, he genuinely is trying but he cannot believe. Is that person that's evangelizing not putting that person at the risk of eternal damnation by opening that opportunity for that person to know about Jesus but not accept it?
No, a big part of that is helping that person live the most flourishing life imaginable on this planet. See, that's the whole thing. Harvard just came out with all these different studies showing that if you go to church on a weekly basis, you will have way less rates of depression and anxiety, you'll live longer, you'll have closer relationships, women 60% higher chance of getting off drugs, you'll give more, and you'll have, and we already said closer relationships, your kids in their 20s and 30s will have much happier and more fulfilling lives. So that's one of the pieces right there. You want to become a Christian, you want to introduce someone to know Christ because they're going to have a much more fulfilling life and do better things for society. Not always. Sometimes Christians mess up, I get that. So that's that part of it as well. You're not just trying to go win souls for heaven. That's no. Jesus also created us to make a difference here and to enjoy it here and forever.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
But here's the bulk of my question that I wanted to ask Stuart that I was trying to ask him, but as Cliff likes to say...
All right, so Stuart and I got to take a course in communication because we have miscommunicated. I'm sorry for that.
Well, Cliff, I agree. I think I got to do the same thing because I don't think I phrased my question very well. He kind of missed the bulk objection that I had and instead talked about in this life and the benefits you get in this earthly world. So here in this video, I'm going to fully clarify my question so there's no confusion on what I'm asking. Stuart talks about someone benefiting from belief in Jesus in this life, but that doesn't address my question because obviously if you accept Jesus to the point where you're benefiting in this life, then your next life you're pretty good. You're pretty much set up to go to heaven. You're doing well. My question is, what about the person that hears about Jesus but genuinely cannot bring themselves to believe? Now, there's a lot of different interpretations of what happens to that person. Some people will be like, Jesus will meet them where they're at and he'll give them a fair judgment. And other people will be like, oh, if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell. It's that simple. But if you have any interpretation that involves that person having to believe in Jesus in order to make it to heaven, then the person who evangelized this person who didn't know about Jesus is immoral because now they opened up that opportunity for them to know that Jesus exists but not be able to accept it, basically guaranteeing their way to hell. Wouldn't they have a better chance of taking God's judgment based on general revelation rather than being forced to accept these claims about Jesus? I'm going to put this in the form of a syllogism because I think when I'm talking about it like this, it seems very unorganized. It's kind of hard to pick out the objections that I have. So I think the syllogism will help organize the argument a little bit. So we have premise 1. if a person dies without knowledge of Jesus, that person has a higher chance of salvation. They may still go to hell if they're highly immoral and they're doing horrible things. Premise 2, if a person becomes aware of Jesus, that person now faces the possibility of eternal damnation if they fail to believe. Premise 3, it is morally wrong to introduce the possibility of eternal harm to someone who previously had higher chances of eternal salvation without that person's consent. So then here in premise 4, we have two characters to make this easier to understand. By preaching to Walter, Peter introduces the possibility of eternal damnation that did not previously exist for Walter. Therefore, Peter acts immorally by preaching to Walter. That's basically the bulk of my argument and objection here to evangelism in any way. If you have a situation where the person can go to heaven if they don't know about Jesus, then why would you introduce them to Jesus? Because now you've opened up the possibility for them to possibly not believe and now go to eternal suffering. Stuart's argument here, even if you want to argue that there's some kind of benefit to knowing about Jesus, doesn't matter at all, because you have eternal suffering compared to finite gains in this life. There's nothing, no amount of psychological happiness, no amount of community, no amount of family, quality life that can make up for eternal suffering in hell if you're not able to believe in Jesus. But again, like I said, all the benefits just follow from believing in Jesus. So that doesn't address the argument at all, because if you're benefiting from believing in Jesus, then you're going to make it to heaven. So it doesn't answer this argument at all. But I hope the syllogism makes it a little bit more structured. Please let me know what you think about it in the comments. I really want to discuss this question because I'm genuinely curious how people address this issue. But now for the second part of the video, I want to give some opinions about the event and Cliffe and Stuart in general. Firstly, I don't like these events much because they create an environment where it's very stressful. You're under a lot of pressure because you have almost 3,000 people sitting there listening to, expecting you to give an answer back to the objections. I feel like this environment creates a kind of battleground where the response has to just come out. You have to have a response. As long as you have some kind of response, you're good. You're keeping your head above water. You're not, losing your points. You're not, your worldview isn't crumbling, and you're not getting embarrassed. So it definitely encourages very fast responses where sometimes they don't even seem to think before they respond. Like, they don't sit there and consider the question and all the parts of the question before they respond. They have to respond very quickly because they have to keep up an appearance of, hey, my worldview is so solid, I don't even have to think. I can just tell you the answer.
For that person to know about Jesus, but not accept it.
No, a big part of that is helping that person live the most flourishing life imaginable on this planet.
I don't think that makes for very honest conversation. I think it would be much better to have a sit down, one-on-one, talk it out, take time to think in order to honestly discuss these ideas. But it's a fun time for them to go do this. It's a fun time for me to show up and argue with them over there. So it's not all bad. I think it's a good thing for them to go over there. I think it's very helpful. And I don't want to be the atheist Grinch here who says, Cliffe and Stuart, get off my campus because you can't have honest conversations. They can come and have fun. It's okay. And honestly, props to Cliffe and Stuart for being able to talk for that long. That's insane. I waited in line for 4 hours and I was tired. I don't know how they're actively talking for almost 10 hours over there. It's genuinely impressive how they're able to have that much energy and talk to that many people. And also, being tired like this makes it very hard to have honest, coherent conversations because you're already tired, you're hungry, you want to go eat, and this person is trying to ask you a question. The 150th person is trying to ask you a question, and you got to sit here and answer it. So I don't blame them if sometimes they try to give a quick answer so, the person can go. But I do have a lot of respect for Cliffe and Stuart because they are very nice people. They're genuinely nice people, and they have families, and they're very respectful to the people they talk to. And I think they're great role models for a lot of guys. And I think after all of the preaching and the prayer and the believe in Jesus and make sure you're reading your Bible, they do genuinely help people. Like, there was a person who was dealing with domestic abuse there, and they asked Stuart a question. They were crying on the mic, and it was a very emotional situation. And, after telling her, okay, you need to pray, you need to make sure God is with you, he gives them actual practical advice where he says, get therapy, go to trusted guardians, try to talk about the situation at home, try to get any resources. they're genuinely helpful to people that need help. And I think if someone is going to go to these people to get help instead of getting no help at all, I'd much rather them do that. But anyways, that's all for today's video. I had a great time talking to Stuart. It was definitely worth the 4-hour wait. It was pretty good. And I hope I get the chance to talk to them again because they're pretty nice guys. I like talking to them. But thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video.